Thank you so much for joining us for today's Ask a Biller webinar. We're joined here by Barbara Griswold. We're so excited to have her here. And we're going to be walking through some of your questions on audits and record requests. Another quick reminder, SimplePractice does not provide insurance, billing, or legal advice. All views and opinions expressed by the presenter are not those of or endorsed by SimplePractice or its affiliates. And with that, I'll now hand it over to Barbara.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you all for joining us and carving out time out of your busy, busy day. Many of you know me, many of you don't, so let me do my little mini intro. I am a private practice coach, which means I help therapists all over the nation to kind of build thriving practices. I'm also the author of Navigating the Insurance Maze, the therapist's complete guide to working with insurance and whether you should, which now just came out recently in its 9th edition. I've worked in the trenches with you folks for 32 years as a private practice clinician, and now I'm morphing my work into providing trainings and consultations to therapists across the country in working with insurance, in documentation, in building your practice, all that stuff that you never learned in grad school. So my goal is to help therapists feel as confident about your business, the business side of your practice, as you do about your clinical skills. And you're welcome to contact me after the webinar for that type of support. All right, let's see if we can advance our little slides here. There we go. All right, we're going to dive right into your pre-submitted questions. Thank you for all the questions you submitted. They're great. There were so many. I think we got thousands of questions, literally. And so, you know, I tried to pick out the ones that were most commonly asked about records and records requests and audits, which is such a fearsome topic for us. And so I'm glad you're here. Hopefully this will reduce your anxiety, or at least you get, you know, better information so that you know what areas you can work on and not just be paralyzed with fear. So, question, what exactly is an audit? I also got questions on how is an audit different from a clinical treatment review. So an audit, the way that we're going to be using it today, is any kind of records requests that you get from an insurance plan. Whenever they ask for your records or to look at your records, and we're going to be talking about all the different types. But this is not the same as a clinical treatment review. Many people call me up and say, Barbara, I'm freaking out. I got this call from an insurance plan. They're auditing me. And they're actually not. Sometimes in that case, they are actually wanting to do a clinical treatment review where they're not wanting to look at your documentation. They just want to ask you some questions about your treatment. And the treatment review is going to be about going forward. It's going to be about, hey, you're treating this person, let's say once a week. Do we want to continue to pay for that at once a week? Do we think this person needs to continue to be covered? Are the things she's talking about actually something an insurance plan will cover? So they're really looking at your treatment. They don't really usually ask. It's usually by phone. They don't usually even ask for your notes. Audits that we're going to talk today have to do with asking for your notes. So that's a whole different thing. I've never signed a contract with an insurance plan. My records can't get audited, can they? Oh, I wish this were true. I'm sorry to say this is something that many out-of-network providers don't realize, is that as soon as your client submits any kind of an invoice, also called a super bill, to an insurance plan and asks the insurance plan to pay, the insurance plan can turn around and either reach out to the therapist and say, hey, we'd like to review your treatment, do one of those clinical treatment reviews I was just discussing, or even say, before we pay this invoice, we want to see the therapist's notes to verify that these, first of all, that they took place, that they are the type of sessions we believe we need to cover, and, you know, whether the frequency of treatment was something that we think is correct. So it's just important for you to know, if you don't sign a contract with an insurance plan or you're working with out-of-network clients, you still can have your records audited. which means you really still need to have terrific notes and documentation, even if you never sign a contract with an insurance plan. So what types of audits and records requests are there? I've made a little slide for you on this. So the type we're going to be talking about today, the ones that mainly fall under the heading of audits or records requests, we're only going to be talking about insurance ones today. We're not talking about legal subpoenas or disability records requests today. We're just talking about insurance audits or records requests. So the two types that you're are the claim or payment related audits. These have to do with a claim that you've submitted or an invoice or super bill that your client has submitted. Now there's two types of claim and payment related audits. There is the prepayment and the post-payment audit. A prepayment is when you've submitted a claim and they say, hey, insurance says, hey, before we pay this, we want to see the notes. And then we'll decide whether we want to pay for this service. A post-payment could be, hey, we've been paying for this service and we've been paying the therapist or the reimbursing the client. This usually happens for in-network therapists mostly. We've been paying this therapist for 2 years or 1 year, and we now want your notes for all those dates of service. And we may decide to take back the money we paid you if we don't think your notes are good enough to support your charges. Okay, this is what's called a clawback. And you hear a lot of that, particularly in online Facebook groups or online groups. People are terrified of these clawbacks, or they're making them seem like they happen all the time. I just want to tell you they are much more rare than it seems like if you participate in any kind of online therapy groups. I mean, it makes it seem like they happen to everyone. But I just want you to know that that is a possibility. We'll talk more about that later. But these are the two types. One is before you've even been paid, they want to see your notes. The other is after you've already been paid. They could say, we want to see your notes, and ask to pay your money back if they don't think your notes are good enough. So the point I really want to make is it's so essential that you have great notes, because that could, your dollars, your income might hinge on just how good your notes are. Okay, so there's a second kind of audit that is just purely administrative and has nothing to do with money. We tend to think, oh, I'm getting audited, and we're terrified we're going to have to give money back. And truly, many audits have nothing to do with money. So this kind of audit is called an administrative audit. And there's two types of those. One is a documentation audit. This is if you're in network with a particular plan, they can randomly just ask to see a client chart or 2 client charts to make sure you have everything in there that you're supposed to. This is mandated by their oversight committees, their oversight organizations that make sure that a certain random number of healthcare providers just need to be pulled out, and their documentation needs to be looked at. Don't feel like you've been singled out. You've probably been picked randomly. And they're just going to look at your charts, and it's going to be like a pass-fail thing. Oh, yes, you have everything in your charts, like 70% of it, good enough to pass. Or no, you don't. Fix this, and we'll pass you next time if you fix it, kind of thing. So these are stressful just because they're a pain in the neck, but they really don't have any consequences. Then there's the most common type of audits, which are risk adjustment audits. We're going to talk more about those because they are the most common type. So question, I got a lot of these questions. I got a call from, fill in the blank, Inovalon, Ciox Health, Cotivity, Datafied, Episource, Alliant, saying they were requesting records. Who are these people? I don't have a contract with them, right? Why did I get this? I'm freaking out. I get this call like 3 times a week and got a lot of those questions pre-submitted by you folks. So I kind of put together a slide on this topic too. What is a risk adjustment audit? If somebody calls you up and says they're from one of these organizations, they're going to send a records request. And what you need to do is read very carefully and look for the words risk adjustment. And if that happens, you can breathe. You can go, okay, and we'll talk about why. This is just, as I say later, more of a fly than a bee. It really has no sting. It's just a pain in the neck. A risk adjustment audit, it's kind of complicated, but basically the insurance plans are just trying to figure out how sick their members are. And they want to go a little beyond what diagnosis you've put on your claim form or your super bill. So they started out years ago just asking for your whole chart. And they still actually ask for your whole chart. But what they're just trying to find out is how sick people are. They use this to basically predict future expenses, and also, yeah, let's stop there. So this is a very statistical review. It has nothing to do with the client. The good thing about the risk adjustment request is it has nothing to do with the client's care, your treatment, their premiums, doesn't have anything to do with money. There's no way that a risk adjustment request can hurt your client or you. And it really they're not looking at you carefully or the quality of your notes or anything. So the thing is, at the beginning, we used to all send in the progress notes that they asked for. They asked for progress notes, and they want to see a year's worth of progress notes. That's what it will ask for. While they still are sending out that same release asking for progress notes, you probably don't need to send them. Almost all of the organizations that are requesting documentation for risk adjustment audits now will accept a treatment summary. They don't say that on the request, but if you want to be 100% sure, you can call them and you contact that requesting agency and just say, hey, can I just send a treatment summary? And I'm going to bet you 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, they will say, yes, a treatment summary is fine. Now, if you don't know what to put in a treatment summary, I have a treatment summary sample on my website. You can just purchase that, use it as a template, and knock it out in 2 seconds. This is one that you shouldn't worry about. It's just like 10 sentences. Don't spend like pages doing a treatment summary for any of your clients for this, because it is purely statistical. Is a client release required? Pretty much no. If you're a network provider, your client has already signed a release at some point with you, hopefully, to release information to their insurance plan just to facilitate claims. And, that same release can apply to releasing this kind of information for risk adjustment audits. Also, the contract you signed with the insurance plan said that you would participate in administrative audits like documentation audits or risk adjustment audits. So it won't say specifically risk adjustment audit, but basically it's part of your contract with the plan that you will participate. So that's a lot of stuff. I know we're going to get some questions on that. So what are the major issues, somebody asked, or many people ask, that could trigger an audit? Why would I be chosen in the first place? Good question. This is one that I hope you all tune into, because it's good to kind of know. Remember that audits are usually or often random. So we tend to take them really personally. I get calls all the time where people say, I know why I was chosen for this, and it's because this person's very difficult, or because they didn't pay me last week, or something that I did in my session last week. And it's like, no, they don't know about that stuff. It's usually that they've either chosen you randomly, or it can be the frequency of your sessions. If you're doing multiple sessions per week, that can more likely trigger, it kind of puts you higher likelihood of triggering an audit because you're outside of the norm. Also, if you're doing a higher number of sessions for the diagnosis, let's say you've given the person an adjustment disorder and you're doing 3 times a week session, that doesn't seem to match up for them, right? They would normally think for 3 times a week sessions, somebody might have a kind of higher level diagnosis. So that might trigger kind of an audit. And remember, an audit is not something that you're like, oh no, audit really comes with the territory when you work with insurance. It's just part of what you can expect. So you should just know, I don't ever make clinical decisions based on the possibility that I'm raising my audit trigger. To me, I make the best clinical decisions I can with that client and just know, hey, I might be hearing from the insurance plan because I've been, for the last 3 months, meeting twice a month with this client, twice a week with this client. And maybe they're going to call me and maybe they're going to question me. And I'm going to tell them why. And I'm going to defend myself. And they'll probably say, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then they're going to go away. So that's really more of a clinical review than an audit. But I guess what I'm saying is, don't ever make clinical decisions based on fear of audit. Try to just know, oh, I may get a call or I may have my notes looked at. So just have really good notes and just really document your decision making. Also, higher use of 90837 or 99354 for some plans. Okay, so many of you don't even know what the 99354. This was an old code that was deleted in 1/1 of 2023. So this is a code for prolonged service code. So if you used to do long 90-minute sessions or more for individuals, or 80-minute sessions or more for couples, some plans would allow you to use this code in addition to a psychotherapy code and bill for those. They've now done away with those and there's no replacement. But I just wanted to put it on here that can trigger audits when you used to use that. But now they're focusing more on the, a high use of 90837, which is a CPT code for a 60-minute individual session, which actually goes from 53 minutes and above. Now, I never recommend that you avoid a 90837 for all plans. If you do a 53-minute session and above, I do recommend that you use that code. But certain health plans are looking at that more carefully and auditing it if you do it every single time. Most notably, Optum, United Healthcare, United Behavioral Health, that's all one company conglomeration, and Medicare. They're the ones who kind of more scrutinize that particular code if you use it every single time. So as I said, it's not that I recommend you avoid it, that code. Just know for United, Optum, and Medicare, especially, your audit risk is going to be higher. So your notes need to be extra excellent. All right. I hear the 90837 60-minute code is being more closely scrutinized. Should I stop using this code? We just kind of answered that one, huh? Where are we at now? Yeah, sorry. I think I just answered that one. I should have taken that one out. Okay, next. I got a request for a full client medical record. Can I refuse? What can I expect? What does the health plan want to see in my charts? Okay, so if they're asking for a full client medical record, and you need to look carefully and make sure this is not a risk adjustment audit. Usually the risk adjustment audit is going to come from a third party, like we said, Novolon or Change Healthcare or Ciox. In those cases, the insurance plan has hired this third party to do these pain in the neck statistical risk adjustment audits. However, if you get a request directly from the health plan and they're asking for a full client record with all your releases and your care coordination and your billing slips and everything, this is not a risk adjustment audit. This is a medical record request where they're, like we talked about it right at the beginning, they're just trying to make sure you have everything in there that you're supposed to have. They have a little checklist and they're going to go down and see if you pass. And remember, we talked about it, it's pass, fail, and then they give you a chance to fix it. So they're not going to kick you out of the health plan if you don't pass. Can I refuse? No, not really. If you are in network, this is part of the agreement that you made up front with them. Your contract says that you will participate in documentation record requests or administrative record requests. What can I expect? They're going to go down their list and they're going to see if you have everything in there that you're supposed to have in there. Now, you can reach out to a health plan ahead of time and say, you know, what do you expect to see in my records? And that they do publicize these things. They're hard to find on their website, but the next slide I have here, I have these freebies that you can go and get, which are, I put together the Aetna Behavioral Health Treatment Record Review requirement, which means basically what does Aetna want to see in your records, and the Optum one from Optum, which is also United Healthcare, United Behavioral Health, what they want to see in your charts, right? Not necessarily in your documentation, your notes. We'll talk about that later. But just like what documents should you have in your charts? So I put these together, and you can download these at my I'm calling my landing page, which is these are freebies for you tuning in today. You can also join my mailing list at that site, and that site is theinsurancemaze.com/SP audits. On that page, I'm going to have these freebies available for you to download, and also all kinds of other resources and goodies and information about our upcoming webinars, and all kinds of other good stuff. But definitely take a minute, write that down, because always afterwards we are like, what was that? Where are the freebies at? theinsurancemaze.com/SP audits. And I think Cheyenne or Ruth might put it in the chat or Q&A so that you can have that. We'll mention it again. If a health plan asks for my notes, what are the most common reasons why they would not pay a claim or ask for money back? Ooh, good question. So I put together a little slide on this. So if they look at your notes, what might make them say, I'm sorry, you know, we're not going to pay? So just remember, unless it's a claims audit, they're unlikely to ask for money back. But if it's a claims audit, they're most likely to ask for money back when there's no documentation for a date of service, or you have insufficient documentation. It's just very poor documentation, or you just don't even have a note for that date of service. That's kind of, or it's so superficial that we really have, or I can't read it, it's illegible, or it's all in some so abbreviated, I don't know what you're talking about. So watch out for abbreviations, always stay away from those. Lack of actual start and stop times. This is a big one that I'm gonna hammer in. If you've started to doze, please wake up at this point. One of the biggest things they are going to check for is the actual therapy portion of your hour start and stop time in every note. So many of the electronic health records, they put in the scheduled start and stop time of the session in each note. So it'll say 11 to 11:55, 11 to 11:55 each time, because that's when the client was scheduled to come. You need to find a way to have the actual therapy start and stop time. So it should say, maybe this week the person was 2 minutes late, 11:02, the therapy started to 11:56. Next week they were right on time, but we started maybe 1 minute late, 11:01 to 11:54. So each week it should be different slightly. I doubt the person came and you started your therapy exactly at 11. So we want it to vary, and then we want the total number of minutes to be at least 53 to bill for that 90837. So always when you add up the total number of the therapy portion of the hour, which cannot include documentation, it can't even include scheduling the next session. It can't include phone calls. It's just therapy. So that needs to be in every one of your notes. That's one thing that they're looking for terrifically right now. They're very focused on that. Incorrect coding they're looking for, and they may reject, especially for those of you who are doing ongoing couples therapy and are billing under an individual therapy code like 90837 because it pays more. Don't do that. They will ask for money back if they figure that out, that you're doing family therapy or couples therapy using a 90837, for example. So watch out for incorrect coding. Lack of documented medical necessity. Take a quick minute in talking about this. Insurance plans only pay for sessions that they believe are medically necessary. They do not pay for personal growth work. They do not pay for improving self-esteem of your clients. They will pay for people who have a diagnosis. It usually needs to be more than a Z code, what used to be called V codes in the DSM. So it needs to be more like an anxiety disorder or depressive disorder. Adjustment disorder is usually fine, but you need to document always the need for treatment. If I'm not hearing in each one of your notes that you are addressing a symptom, you are addressing the diagnosis. If I'm hearing, we came in and we talked about how his mother pisses him off. And I told him, blah, blah, blah. If I'm not really hearing that there's a level of distress, the insurance plan might say, yeah, this sounds like life. This doesn't sound like a mental health disorder. So we're always having to kind of document the need for treatment and the diagnosis and how it continues to exist. Another thing, if they ask for your notes and you don't submit them, obviously that will cause them often not to pay. No documentation of interventions or progress. Those two things are things that they're looking for. So always remember to document client progress and your interventions. And the interventions, which I was going to talk about more later, but we'll talk about it now. Those interventions should be more than just supported, listened, explored emotions. They shouldn't be, the gold standard is that they shouldn't be anything that a mother could do or a grandmother could do. It's not that those aren't important, and they are the bedrock of therapy, of course, but putting empathy is not something an insurance plan will pay for. We need to be talking about the techniques that we went to graduate school to learn. Psychoeducation is fine, but you might want to say a little bit about that. Like that could be one. I always tell people, try to include 3 interventions in there. So you might say CBT helped client identify distorted thoughts around, in relationship, and how his expectations are very high for his, or made this interpretation, or did psychoeducation around divorce and grieving stages, whatever. So try to kind of identify things a little bit beyond listening and reflective listening and supported and validated. Go a little higher and try to kind of use different wording. And lack of a treatment plan is a big one. Many of us don't do treatment plans, but that is something that you can get nailed on, and that they might not pay you back if you have great notes, but you have no treatment plan. Everyone needs to do a treatment plan, especially for insurance clients. For all your clients, it's usually required, but you definitely for your insurance clients. And the treatment plan needs to be medically necessary. It needs to be aimed at symptom reduction. It needs to be aimed at the diagnosis. If your treatment plan, oh goodness, excuse me. If your treatment plan has goals like build a relationship with client, create safe space, build self-esteem for client, this is not something an insurance plan will pay for. So just know you have just sunk your entire treatment. And just to say up front, building a safe space for a client is not a goal that the client came in for treatment. So your treatment plan always needs to have something that the client is wanting to get out of at the end of treatment. So that's more of a building block. That's not a treatment plan goal. I have a whole webinar on treatment planning. So if you haven't been trained on that, check that out. All right. What if I get a records request and my records are not good or, okay, non-existent? Can I clean them up a bit? Often after watching a webinar like this, people are like, hey, I haven't been doing so well in my notes. What can I do now to go back and clean them up? Yeah, the kind of the quick overview of that is that you cannot go back and clean up your notes, really, and make it appear that you wrote them on the date of the session. So let's say I don't like a session note that I wrote 3 months ago, or maybe I didn't write them. I was really busy that week. I cannot make a note appear that I wrote it on that date of service and, clean it up or write it and make it appear like I wrote it then. If you want to add something to your records, you're allowed to do that, but you have to cite that it is an addendum and you have to say when you added it. So you just have to be really clear about when you are adding information, and you cannot go back and clean them up. I mean, that would be fraud, let's say, if you did it. Because you're making it appear that something was there that wasn't there. I got a request for my records. What's the first thing I should do? Yay, good question. Let's look at the next slide here. So don't panic. I hear people constantly who panic when they get a records request. Go back to the idea that very few records requests really are the troublesome kind. Chances are this is just an annoying kind, and it may be nothing. If you get a phone call, which the risk adjustment ones will start with a phone call, and they'll just be like, hi, I'm from SciOx or I'm from Inovalon, and we're just checking your address because we need to send you a records request. Fine. You respond to them, let them send the written request, and then, so don't even worry about it until you get the written request, and then you can see what kind of request it is, who's asking for it, how extensive it is, what kind it is. It may on there have a deadline. Don't freak out too much about the deadline. You often can get an extension if you call up the requesting agency and just say, hey, I can't deal with this right now. Can you give me an extra 2 weeks or something? Now, you don't have to tell them this part, but what you really want to say is, I want to meet with Barbara first and talk to her about this, and then, or talk to my professional association, and then I'll talk to you. So, schedule an appointment with me if you want, and then, then respond to them. So I can reduce your anxiety. We can make a strategy for you. It's probably not a big deal. And then you want to read it really carefully for the purpose. Look for those words, risk adjustment audits. So many therapists tell me, I got a records request. I was so nervous I couldn't even read it. So it's very common that we just can't even read it. And I'll say to them, did you see the words risk adjustment? Oh, I don't know. And I'll say, so look at it right now. Just read it right now. Read it out loud. And they'll say, oh, I didn't see anything about risk adjustment. I'll say, read it right now carefully to me over the phone or on the video. And there it is, the words risk adjustment. And that's when you go, okay, that's the least worrisome type of request, because it really, as I said, has no consequences on anyone. And it's probably something that you can just write a few sentences, treatment summary, and send to them, and they go away. Do contact the requesting agency and just ask if you can send a treatment summary. Do not send a treatment summary unless for something like a documentation review or something else. Always only send a treatment summary if you've gotten that kind of permission. But it will not say anywhere in the request, hey, you can just send a treatment summary. But 99% of people send a treatment summary and they're fine. But it's a good idea to just contact the requesting agency and make sure. And definitely consult your professional association or me. And I'm happy to walk you through whatever records request you get and be sure what kind it is and to kind of strategize with you about what's the simplest response. Don't avoid. What needs to be in my notes or treatment plan so that I pass an insurance audit? All right, here's where we go into prevention, right? We want it to be that if you get an audit request or a documentation request or any kind of request 6 months from now for today, you will not worry at all because you have the most stellar notes. So starting today, we want you to have terrific notes. What do they usually want to see? So common insurance documentation requirements, I went to 8 different insurance plan websites to see what they require in their notes. So here's kind of the conglomeration of what they all pretty much require. And this is just in your progress notes. We're not talking about the intake, which they require some additional stuff. But in each one of their notes, if it's telehealth, we want that exact client address, where the client is located. This is maybe required by your state. If the client's at home, you can just write client at home because you have that address on file. But I have to put the exact client address in the progress note. If they're at their Aunt Susie's in Bakersfield, I got to write Aunt Susie's address? Yes. Why? Number one, you're documenting that you're legally allowed to practice where the client is, because if she's across state lines and you're not licensed in that or permitted to practice in that other state, so you should be asking where the client is located each time, unless you see the same pictures behind her every time and you know that's her home. It's probably fine to just write client at home and you have that address on file. Why do I need to have Aunt Susie's address in my progress note? Because if something happens, the client goes into an emergency, she melts down in the middle of the session, I need to know where to send help. So for those 2 reasons, you should be documenting the exact client address in each progress note. Also, when you're doing telehealth, you should always say telehealth consent on file in every note, even though you might have a written telehealth consent already, which I totally recommend. It's good to write 2 things, actually: telehealth consent on file or telehealth consent given, and a client deemed appropriate for telehealth. In certain states like California, it's kind of required that you assess a client in each session for their appropriateness for telehealth. That's a new state law. So it's good to just write that down. Client deemed appropriate for telehealth, or have a little checkbox. Medicare may be asking even for the platform that you use, whether you use Zoom or DoxyMe or whatever. So that might be something that you might want to write down in there. HIPAA compliant, hopefully. Actual therapy start and end times we talked about. The date and client's name should be on every page. And you know what? Notes should be on separate pages. Very often they want the notes on separate pages. So each date should have a separate page. The service type, was it individual? Was it couples? Was it group? Also, who else attended the session? I didn't write that in there, but the problem statement and client description. What did the client come in talking about that week? Hopefully, most of us have that one. That's a pretty good one. Here's one we need a little more work in: symptoms and impairment. So if you're writing down, client talked about divorce and his wife, who he's really mad at. Okay, and then you go on to maybe what you did. I advised him to this or that or that. But I'm not hearing symptoms and impairment. So what symptoms is he having? Is he depressed? How depressed is he? How is he impaired by that depression if he's having it? Is he having trouble focusing at work? Is he having trouble sleeping? So we need to flesh this part out, particularly when working with insurance, because we're constantly defending that this person is not just coming in and doing personal growth work, that there are current symptoms and what the status of those symptoms are and how the client's being impaired by those symptoms. Interventions, that's what you did in the session and any homework you assigned. And again, we talked about that. Maybe 3 would be great. progress toward treatment plan goals, support for your diagnosis. This comes in the symptom and impairment section, and just the need for treatment. So you can make a separate section for that, or you can just kind of put it in your notes. The date for the next appointment, and therapist signature and credentials. Always have a legible signature and your credentials at the bottom. And somewhere on the page should probably be your license number and license. Yeah. The date of next appointment and I would say if you're meeting like twice a week with a client, I would be documenting your decision for that. We'll meet again this week because client's level of depression is so high or whatever. Defend why you're making that clinical decision. Or we're going to go a month between sessions because why? And it could be something like clients going on a 1-month cruise or client's level of symptomology is quite low right now, and we're going to see how he does with one. The client seemed open to that idea or something. So just kind of document your thinking, your decision making. Now, continuing with common documentation requirements. What about that treatment plan we talked about? It needs to have goals that are measurable, medically necessary, symptom focused, and diagnosis related. To give you a very short version, a treatment plan for a person with adjustment disorder with anxiety should have your first goal about anxiety reduction, right? So it should be something like client will report a decrease in anxiety episodes, frequency, duration, something like that. So whatever your diagnosis is, your first goal at least should be focused on that. If she's got a depressive disorder, you're going to say reduction of depression is going to be your first goal. Then you can work on some other goals, building support system or referring for medication management perhaps, or something like that. And then you're going to have the interventions planned. Not everyone, just a couple. And, that you're going to do weekly sessions with this person. They're going to be individual, and then maybe you're going to make a referral to medication management, and maybe you plan to do some mindfulness and CBT. So just kind of a quick and dirty overview of how you plan to deal with this person. And then some anticipated timelines. Just kind of, do you think the sessions are going to take 6 months, a year? What do you think for each one of your goals, probably? And if your documentation isn't your strong point, which is true for so many of us, I do have 2 webinars on this topic: what's missing from your charts, writing great notes, and how to write a 10-minute treatment plan. These are separate from SimplePractice. They're on my store page, and they're also going to be on our little landing page for this webinar, which I'll tell you again at the end, and you can check those out. I'd like any tips you have to prevent having to pay money back to an insurance plan, right? This is the last thing that we want. We don't get paid enough by insurance, much less having to worry about giving it back, right? Here's a couple tips. What you can do now: have all your insurance clients sign an informed consent up front, stating that they understand that their notes may be requested by a health plan. So if you're in network, I kind of fleshed out on my informed consent what I'm having them sign. So it says, hey, you understand that your notes could be requested by the health plan, that that I may have to participate in a clinical review and reveal information about you, or in a documentation review. So I just kind of did more in terms of informing clients. Now, remember, if you're out of network and your notes get requested, talk to your clients. You can't release anything without a release if you're out of network to an insurance, because you don't have any kind of agreement with them, and the client hasn't signed any release. So you talk to your clients and say, hey, your health plan is asking for a release of information of basically some of your notes that went along with these sessions. The client at that point might say, no, I don't want you to send my notes from those sessions to the health plan never mind, I won't submit my super bill or my invoice to them for reimbursement. That's fine. They're not going to get paid. That's up to them. It's their choice. It's their notes. Or they could say, yes, I do want you to release my notes to my client, to my insurance plan, because I want to get reimbursed. If so, they need to sign a release with you allowing that. Review your charts with the documentation audit tools that I'm giving you as part of this webinar. And I'll give you that link again soon. Write every note legibly and as if a plan will be reviewing. Like, always just take really super notes. I know you guys are busy and I know we all don't have time, but we need to make the time. If you're getting behind in your notes, contact me and we can strategize about that. But you need to kind of make it a habit, like brushing your teeth. For those of us who are good at brushing your teeth, I'm not actually one of those, but where at the end of every day, you have done all your notes from that day, or within 24 hours, 48 at the most, that you have a way that you don't fall behind and that you have time to write good notes, because that protects you. It leads to better quality care, and it helps you to defend and get paid for sessions. How about that? With Optum and Medicare clients, particularly, defend in your notes your use of that 90837 or your multiple times weekly sessions. Make sure it's very clear. You could even have a separate section in your notes saying that the 90837 extended session, they sometimes call it, is necessary. That extra time was necessary due to, the severity of the client's symptoms, or the fact that they're dual diagnosis, or the fact that you're doing EMDR or something that takes longer, some kind of a DBT protocol that takes longer. The client has a lot of trauma in their background, something like that takes longer in session to process. So have a little line too. Make it a priority to keep up with your notes and to improve your documentation. As I just said, I think people don't realize, if you're falling behind, it's such a stressor to us that we don't even realize until we start finding new ways to keep up. Because maybe there's a bright side of an audit. 3 people who had gone through audits wrote different things to me, and I pulled them out. I take great pride in my clinical work, but documentation was not a priority. After this audit, I learned to make it more of a priority. Another person, while the audit was stressful, something good came out of it. I now take more detailed notes, and to my surprise, this is having positive benefits on my therapy. The last person said the whole audit experience was stressful, but in the end, I would consider it a positive one. It really helped me improve my notes and note-taking habits. Now I feel good about my notes. I get them done on time, and I don't worry if I get another records request. So, we all worry about audits, but I do think that in some ways, if you don't allow it to paralyze you with fear, the concern about an audit can be positive. Just always making sure that you're getting your notes done and that you are doing them in a way that actually can benefit you clinically. All right. So before we take some live questions, we've got a few more little things to remind you about. Cheyenne, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. So again, as a reminder, this webinar will be recorded. You can always access our entire Ask a Biller series on our website, simplepractice.com/askabiller series. I'll place it down below in the chat as well. All you need to do is enter your email address, and it'll unlock access to all of them. All right. And then again, as a reminder, you will get a copy of the webinar recording along with a copy of the slides. And then we'll send you the link to access on demand, like I mentioned on our Ask Biller series. And also, please join us for our next Ask a Biller webinar. This is Insurance 101, what every therapist should know, whether you're thinking about taking insurance, you're not sure, the pros and cons. Barbara will cover all of it, and that's going to be July 13th. I'll also drop the registration page down below as well, so you can pre-register for that.
And this is, thanks, Cheyenne. And this is also for people who want nothing to do with insurance and never plan to join a health plan. It's just kind of what everybody needs to know, even if you don't want nothing to do with insurance.
Exactly. And also as a reminder, sign up for Pollen. There's news stories weekly. You can get the latest industry news, tips for practitioners, our webinars, resources, ebooks, all sorts of things. So definitely check it out. And now we can get started with the live questions. And I'll just keep this freebie slide up here just as a reminder to check out Barbara's site. And I do have the URL linked above as well. Okay, so let's just dive right in with questions. We have our first question from Jesse. How important is it to put the time of the actual session as long as it corresponds with the time on the session listed on our EHR?
Great question, Jesse. It's essential because, first of all, if you were to print out your, so we don't need the duration of the session. That's not important. What we need is those therapy start and stop times. Because as I said, in your EHR, it'll probably put down the scheduled start and stop times, which are not your actual therapy start and stop times. And your insurance is looking for the start and stop times of the therapy that happened that day. And, you know, if a client is 10 minutes late, you have to down code it basically because maybe you didn't get 53 minutes of session. So for that session, you may have to go from a 90837 that was scheduled, that 60-minute code, you may have to go down to the 45-minute code, which goes all the way to 52 minutes. So they're going to match up your number of start and stop times of the therapy. So also, you have to make sure that when you print out a progress note, it has the start and stop times. And sometimes the progress note, when printed out, let's say to give to an insurance plan, doesn't have what's showing up in your EHR. So always write down the actual sessions, therapy start and stop times in the progress note.
Thank you, Barbara.
Sure.
We'll take our next question here from Elizabeth. If I have a 13-year-old client who is trans, does not want parents to know at this point, but parents are paying for insurance and treatment, how can I document to protect client confidentiality, meet insurance so that the parents don't find out for now? I'm not licensed yet, but will be soon and will bill insurance. Client has anxiety and depression from gender dysphoria.
It's a great question, and it could apply to a lot of things that you don't know whether you want to put in somebody's chart. The fact that they masturbate 12 times a day, or the fact that they're AIDS positive for AIDS, or that they're having an affair. There's a lot of issues that our clients would really want us to keep private. And every insurance expert or every, I'll say, documentation expert and attorney you talk to will tell you something different. Attorneys will generally tell you to put as little as possible and barely say anything because they know. But clinically, we really aren't allowed to not put down what a client is being treated for. It could come back and haunt us. So, you know, we have to put enough in there so that anyone could judge if there was a complaint against us, what we're treating and the treatment that we gave. So, you know, I can't tell you an answer for this one. You may want to say client is exploring her sexual, you know, her gender identity or sexual orientation. You know, you could just kind of put something kind of more global. And, but if you really feel like this client has, let's say, gender dysphoria, and you're not putting that on, you're not writing down that diagnosis, then you're kind of getting into the land of possible insurance fraud because you're putting down other things than what you're really treating the client for. So, you know, like I said, this is there's no clarity here, but you have to just try to walk a middle line. And I really feel for you. This is especially a tough one with clients who are working with parents who are feuding over them, and the kid could be brought into a custody battle, and your notes could be brought into a custody battle. You don't necessarily want everything the kid said to be accessed by a parent. So it's a great question, and you have to just kind of walk that line of putting enough but not too much, I guess. Good luck with that.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. We'll take another one here from Stephanie. How do you know to give counseling or psychotherapy notes?
Great question. Okay, so there's two types of notes talked about in HIPAA. There's progress notes, which was what we were talking about today. Those are required. These are what happened in the session, what interventions happened, what the client said, what progress they're making, what your support for your diagnosis, all that kind of factual stuff. Some people keep a separate set of notes called psychotherapy notes. HIPAA gives psychotherapy notes, which is a terrible name for them because it's too confusing, a separate higher degree of confidentiality. So while insurance plans can ask for progress notes, they cannot ask for psychotherapy notes. What's a psychotherapy note? Psychotherapy note is basically something that most of us don't keep. It's has to be kept separate from the medical record, set of thoughts that the therapist is having about the case. Maybe like our personal diary, like, oh, this client has this particular transference issues, or I have this, we have these counter transference issues going on, or I think he's enmeshed with his mother, or whatever. So if you keep those, they need to be kept separate to be afforded any special higher level of confidentiality. And you do not give those unless they are subpoenaed. However, keep in mind that a client can order them to be released to in certain situations. The client can't get them, and they can be subpoenaed. So your psychotherapy notes are not completely confidential. So many attorneys encourage us not to keep them because we often forget that they're not, that they can be released.
Do they specifically say risk adjustment audit? If not, how will we know it's that kind of audit?
Yeah, on the paper that you get, it'll go into some gobbledygook about, we want to check diagnoses and we're just kind of looking, blah, 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 blah. But it'll either say in the upper that it's from the risk adjustment team, or it'll say in the body, if you read every word, it'll say somewhere in there the word, this is a risk adjustment audit, or for risk adjustment purposes, or at the very end, it'll be from, Tom, Dick, and Harry in the risk adjustment team. So somewhere on there, it'll say the word risk adjustment, and that's when you can breathe and go, phew, this is nothing. But yes, it should say on but they don't usually tell you that on the phone when they call up. If Ciox or Inovalon calls, they're not usually going to say, hey, we're calling about a risk adjustment audit. Just answer them, give them your address, and have them send it, and then you can look at it when it arrives.
If you fall behind in notes and get audited, is that an automatic fail of the audit?
Well, it's an automatic fail if you don't turn in notes for any data service they ask for. Some people, unfortunately, at this moment, write notes and try to pass them off as ones that they did at that time. And, like I said, that's fraud, but that's what some people do. And they wouldn't fail the audit, but they will have committed fraud. So you're in between a rock and a hard place. Sometimes you can turn in some kind of a summary, but I think you probably wouldn't pass. So reach out to me if you get one of those audits, and we'll strategize for you.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you for covering a ton of questions that everyone had.